heck are blending modes and how do you even use them? Hello wonderful people, my name is Genevieve and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. Now if I had to pick one question I get the most often on YouTube, it would probably be something along those lines. I mean, blending modes are both some of the most powerful tools we as digital artists have compared to traditional media, but they can also be some of the most confusing. The great news is, all you need is a basic understanding of a few key elements to unlock a whole new world of possibilities in your art. So let's jump in, shall we? To use blending modes, you need at least two layers, a base and a blend, which is just a fancy name for a layer on which a blending mode has been applied. Now, to be totally accurate, we should say that blending modes dictate how the pixels from different layers interact together. But since pixels can be a bit of an abstract concept, we're going to use the word colors in this video. So when we're talking about blending modes, we are essentially referring to dozens of color parameters and mathematical formulas with strange names like linear burn or screen. But the thing is, we really don't need to memorize the exact science behind all the different blending modes to use them. As creators, we only need to remember the effect of those blending modes, which can be broken down in just 6 categories. And not even 6, honestly it's 5 because one of the categories is the normal mode. The other ones though are darken, lighten, contrast, inversion, and color. That's it. So let's look at some examples starting with the darken category. Now if you have your favorite art or design software handy, feel free to use it to try stuff out with me. Otherwise, we'll use these handy dandy color scales to test out the different blending modes, and we're also going to test them out on this little guy right here to see how blending modes can be used in an illustration. And here, don't try to memorize everything or to take notes. I will link a cheat sheet that I made in the description below if you want to download it. It is totally free and it's going to have the most important information. So we're going to compare all the different blending modes using as the base the color chart that is on the left and the chameleon on the right. And then we're going to use different layers for the blend. Well, not quite. For the color chart, it's always going to be the same blend layer, so just the little lines. But for the chameleon, the blend layer is going to change depending on the category, so it's going to be an example of how you could use that category of blending mode within an illustration. So for the darken category, we're going to try and add some shadows on the chameleon, which means the blend layer is going to look a little bit like this. First up, multiply. So if we talk about the definition of what multiply does, basically, it's exactly what the name says. It multiplies the luminosity of the base and the blend, creating a darker result. Now, translation to normal English, it's just going to blend both colors and make them darker. That means multiply is really great for shadows because you can paint your shadows on a separate layer and then apply the blending mode on that layer, and whatever color you are using is going to become darker. And that means two things, honestly. The first one is you could add quickly a tint to your shadows. So instead of having shadows that are all kind of grayish or darker version of your base color, you can have shadows that have a bit of blue to them or a bit of purple to them. So that really enriches your illustration. And the second thing it means is you only have to pick one color for all of your shadows. So instead of going, if I look at the chameleon here and picking a dark cream color for the belly, then just drawing that section, picking a dark green for the rest of the chameleon, painting that section, a dark brown for the branch, you get the idea. You can just paint all of your shadows on one layer with one color and then apply that layer as the blending mode multiply, and the colors are going to blend with the base. And you can also use multiply on your sketch layer, so adding multiply instead of just keeping your sketch layers as normal is going to help you see your sketch really well on dark colors, on light colors, whatever the color below your sketch is, the sketch is going to look different. So that way it's just always going to be super clear what is the sketch and what is your base color. Now, if we look at linear burn, we're going to notice that it's quite similar to multiply in the sense that it takes the blend layer to make the base layer darker. But there's a few differences, they're quite subtle. One of them is everything becomes a bit darker than it would in multiply, and the colors are also just more saturated. So for that reason, linear burn is the blending mode I personally use most of the time in my shadows. I just find the result look a bit more vibrant than if we were to use multiply. Now, color burn, on the other hand, that one is a bit more complicated because it does a lot of things at the same time. Like, it increases the contrast between the base and the blend layer, and also reduces the highlights and saturates the midtones. So if you look at the color charts, you're going to understand what I mean. On the base, whatever is white or black is going to totally absorb the blend, but the midtones are going to become really contrasted and saturated. Now, this is personally not a blending mode I use a lot in illustration because it's a little bit hard to predict what's going to happen, so I prefer sticking with either linear burn or multiply. Now, darken is a bit weird because it doesn't blend the color, it just compares them and keeps only the darkest. So you can see that happen very, very clearly in the color charts as well as on the chameleon. The shadows are only showing on the light part, so the belly, and not on the green that is a bit darker. Darker color does work similarly to darken in the sense that it's not blending the colors, it's just comparing them and keeping the darkest ones. But darker color, instead of looking at the different color channels, so red, green, or blue, it's going to consider the color as a whole, so all channels combined together. That means you don't get the slightest blending whatsoever. It's one color or the other, it's the base or the blend, whichever one is the darkest. But again, if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, that's perfectly fine. Just look at the result and you're going to get a feel for what it does, and that's all you need to know. And with that, it is time for the secret password, but we're going to do it extra quick in this video. If you've watched this far, just leave me a comment below with which blending mode is your favorite or which one you're the most excited to try. The lighten category is almost the exact opposite of the darken one, so it should be pretty simple. And we're going to switch up our blend layer for the chameleon here, so instead of shadows, we're going to add some highlights. So if we look at screen, essentially it's the opposite of multiply, so instead of making your colors darker, it's making them lighter depending on what is on the blend. Nothing complicated here. And just like blending modes from the darken categories were helpful to create shadows, blending modes from the lighten categories are helpful to create lights. The reasons are the same. You only have to pick one color to do all of your lights, and you're also able to quickly give a slight hue or a slight tint to your lights. So instead of having lights that are just lighter version of your base color, you're going to get lights that are either orange or yellow to mimic the sun, or blue if you're in a magical environment. So you can really customize your piece that way. But that brings the question, how do you select the colors that you use on your blend layers? I personally like to pick something I think is roughly going to be in the ballpark of what I want. So usually my lights, I'm going to pick a light orange or yellow because I want my characters to look like they're outside in the sun. And once you've painted some of the shadows or some of the light, you can always tweak the color of your blend layer by using, for example, in Procreate, the hue, saturation, and brightness tool, or in Photoshop, you would have the adjustment layer. Honestly, any tool that allows you to change the colors of a layer you could use here and experiment and play with your blend layer. Now, just like screen was the opposite of multiply, you could think of add as the opposite of linear burn. So just like when you compared linear burn and multiply, add is essentially doing the same thing as screen, but just more intensely, so the colors are going to be brighter and more saturated. Now, add is the blending mode I personally use a lot when adding highlights because it's just so nice and bright, but it is also very, very intense, so you might want to lower the opacity of your layer if you are using add, so you can benefit from the nice saturation and brightness without everything looking too overblown. If we keep going with the comparison, color dodge would be the opposite of color burn. So instead of increasing the contrast between the blend and the base, color dodge is going to decrease that contrast and really blow out the highlights. One thing that remains the same though is that your colors in the midtones are going to be much more saturated than before. Now you probably guessed it by now, lighten is the opposite of darken, so it's going to compare your base, and your blend is going to keep whichever color is the lightest. And finally, lighter color is the opposite of darker color. So once more, the software is going to compare the colors on the base and the blend and keep whichever one is the lightest, but it's not looking at the individual color channels, so not RGB, it's really just looking at the color as a whole, which means it's going to be either the blend or the base color, one or the other, no blending at all. Now, the contrast category is a little bit more complicated because it combines both the lighten and the darken categories at the same time. So if you're new to blending modes or if you're just a bit confused right now, that's totally okay. I recommend you open up the cheat sheet, put it next to the video, that way you're going to have a quick way to visualize how everything is interacting together. So first up is overlay, and you can think of overlay as a combination of multiply and screen. It's mostly going to be adding contrast within the midtones, making the darker colors even darker and the lighter colors even lighter. Soft light is very similar to overlay, it's just going to add more contrast within the midtones, but this time it's going to be a bit softer as a result, not as harsh and contrasted. I personally like to use either overlay or soft light to add a bit more contrast in my character. I don't always do that, but sometimes I just pick a lighter color with a little bit of a hue to it depending on the environment. So if my character is outside, I could use a blue for the sky, and then painting over the areas that should be in the light very, very softly, sometimes lowering the opacity of that layer as well. Hard light is also a combination of multiply and screen, but it's kind of on steroid. As you can see, it doesn't affect just the midtone, it affects everything from white to black. So this is a blending mode you could use in an extreme lighting scenario. So for example, if your character is in the dark and then there's one colored light shining on him, you could pick the color you want and then apply your layer as hard light, and it should look like a bright colored light. Now, vivid light is an extreme version of overlay, so it's also going to be only working on the midtones. But everything on your blend layer that is lighter than 50% gray is going to become much, much, much lighter, and everything that is darker than 50% gray is going to become much, much darker. And you can also see everything is so saturated. So vivid light is an extreme blending mode for sure. If you use it, you probably want to lower the opacity of your layer in conjunction to it. As you can see, linear light is also a very strong blending mode. It's actually a combination of color burn and color dodge, and if you remember, those two blending modes individually are already doing a whole lot. So linear light is really taking that to the next level. Everything is going to be amplified. That's all you have to remember. So your contrast is going to be amplified and the saturation is going to be amplified. With pin light, this is where things are starting to get weird. So essentially, this blending mode is combining both darken and lighten, which means your midtones are going to start being removed. It's mostly going to be focusing on super bright and super dark colors with weird blending in between. Now, speaking of weird, hard mix is probably the weirdest of all the blending modes in the contrast category, because the result is either going to be white or black or one of the 6 primary colors, so red, blue, green, yellow, cyan, and magenta. That's it. You just have 8 different options for hard mix. Now, hard mix and pin light, they're both really strange. I obviously don't use them a lot in illustration. I think they're just not great for digital art in general. So if you find them confusing, feel free to just forget about them. We're going to move on to the next category. To be totally honest with you, the inversion category is not necessarily one I use personally a lot in illustration because it creates really dramatic effect, it kind of flips the colors around, and that's not necessarily something I'm looking for. But it can still be a very cool tool to have in your toolbox in digital art in general, so we're still going to look at the different blending modes and we're going to see what they do, but I'm not going to have an example on the chameleon, it's only going to be on the color swatches. First up is difference. Now, if you look at it mathematically, what difference does is exactly like the name says, it calculates the difference between the blend and the base layer. Now, what that means in normal English is that any white section on your blend layer is going to invert the color of the base, so it will become black. Any black section on the blend layer is going to produce no change on the base, and any other color on the blend is going to slightly darken the base. Now, exclusion has the same effect on white and black as difference does, but it doesn't darken the midtones. Now, subtract is a tricky one because it is an inversion in the sense that the colors on your blend layer are going to be inverted, and then those colors are going to darken the base layer. And the lighter the original base color, the darker it is going to become. And yes, this blending mode is confusing. That's totally true, but there's also not a whole lot of scenarios in which you would use it, so feel free to just forget about it if you want. And the last one in this category is also a confusing one, divide. Now, divide is the opposite of subtract, so any super dark color on your blend layer is going to create a really bright result. Once more, feel free to just disregard this one, it's confusing and not used that often in digital art. And the last category we're going to look at is the color category, which is much more straightforward than the previous one, so that's great. And the blending modes in this category can be used to change the colors of the base layer. So to illustrate that, we're going to use a rainbow blend layer on our chameleon. So first up is hue. Now, hue, as you can see, is going to change the hue of the base, but the brightness and saturations are going to remain the same. Now, color is very similar to hue, but this time the saturation is going to change as well. So you're going to have a change in hue, saturation, but the brightness is going to remain the same. As you can probably guess, luminosity, what it does is it takes the luminosity or the brightness of the blend layer and applies it to the base, but the hue and the saturation remain the same. And finally, we have saturation, so whatever saturation you have on the blend is what is going to be applied on the base, but the hue and the brightness are going to remain the same. And there you go, that was the overlook of the different blending modes. Now the key here is really to remember that all you need to do is find a general category and then explore the different blending modes within that category to see what you prefer for your illustration depending on your own needs. So there's never a right or wrong way to use blending modes, it's really all about testing. And that's always my answer to whenever I get a question about blending mode. It is just pick the category that works the best for what you're trying to do. So if you want to add shadow, picking, for example, the darken category, and then just try the few blending modes that are within this category to see what works best for you. Now, that might seem a bit tedious when you're just getting started, but the more comfortable you get with blending modes, you're going to get a feel for roughly what they can do for you. So you're going to be able to expect the result, essentially, and you're not always going to have to try them all and then tweak the colors. But to start with, just focus on the category depending on what you're trying to do, and that's it. That's all you have to know. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about digital art, I highly recommend you check out this playlist because I have so much more to teach you. But before we leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos I post every Tuesday and Saturday. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.